And I'm Katie.
And we're two girls who scare easily. And we talk about interesting and spooky things that happen in and around Colorado. And today, Katie has a story for us. And I've heard it's a good one.
It
I'm
is
excited.
it is a doozy. There's a method to the madness. So don't worry, folks. We have hit, I am hoping, a two-parter. But it might also end up being three. And the reason will explain itself. So speaking of higher education for animals, today we're going to be starting our journey in the higher education Auraria campus. Which you might be wondering, why the fuck are we talking about a college campus? Well, a couple things. One, it's interesting on its own. Auraria is a tri-institutional campus that is walking distance from downtown Denver. When I mean walking distance, it is like 4 or 5 blocks off of Larimer Square and 16th Street Mall. I would take the bus to Union Station and then walk from Union Station to campus every 5 days a week. So it is bing bong right there. And it is home to 3 universities: University of Colorado Denver, Metropolitan State University, and then the Community College of Denver. But that's not why it's really interesting, and that's not the focus of our story today. The reason is Auraria also gets its name from the Auraria town and then neighborhood that was leveled when they built it in 1965. And when I say leveled, I mean they leveled the entire area and built the campus right on top.
Okay.
So, part one will get us up to 1965 when the flood and then the urban renewal project, loose interpretation. It was urban. Was it a renewal? Debatable. That will be part two, will be the creation of the college campus. And the reason it's in 2 parts is because there was big feels. This was not an abandoned neighborhood. People were here. A lot of people. It was still very much a vibrant, thriving area with residents who were multi-generational and centers of community for BIPOC and Latina groups, like Denver residents who were BIPOC and Latina. And then suddenly it turned into, this place is run down, we're just going to wipe it off the map. So I want to give that its like the appropriate amount of attention. I don't want to just brush over, and you can't do that in one part. There's too much history with Auraria itself, and then how the campus was created, and the controversy surrounding it, and the arguments that Denver made for creating the campus where it did versus the communities that it impacted. And then, hopefully in 2 parts, we will finish with some of the historic buildings that were preserved from the Aurarian neighborhood and why they are so important. And if we get time, the spooky side of everything, because you don't get Wild West, gold mining, prohibition, lawlessness, leveling a neighborhood, building on top of it, multiple murders on the campus without a healthy amount of supernatural activity. Now, I think that I can do 1965 to modern day and with a spooky in 2 parts. But as I am planning out part 2, it might just be Spooky City part 3. Because have
We
you
want to
ever
give the
been?
spookiness the time it deserves as well.
Yes. Have you ever been to the Auraria campus?
Maybe I
Okay.
may have taken, this is weird, I may have taken my cats to get spayed on that campus.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they have
Yeah.
like a really cheap like spay and neuter your cats thing where you just like drop them off in the morning. It's this like mass thing, like everybody drops off their cats one particular day
Oh,
and then
nice.
they spay a bunch of them and then you pick them up.
That's actually very helpful for the community, for
I
both
mean, it
animal
really was.
health and public health. So it's
Hmm.
fantastic. I have been there a lot. I actually went to Metro. So that was I spent 2.5 years, 4 or 5 days a week, just down there all the time. So I know the
That'll
campus
do
very
it.
well.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely fascinating, but it is weird. It
Hmm.
feels it feels disjointed. Like when you're on campus, you just feel like, okay, so I'm downtown Denver and I'm now in college. Okay. There's old buildings of every century. There's 19th and 20th century buildings there. And it's an open campus. And you are right off 16th Street. So you get all sorts of folks. So even if it wasn't built on top of a very important and historic neighborhood in Denver's history, that would be weird. And as I hinted, we'll go into more detail in part 2/3. There have been multiple murders that took place on campus. And it's just a strange thought. So we're going to dive into part 1. And I'm going to do my best to speak. I don't know. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do
Well, we can ask.
I'm going to do with what I am. So, okay. We are talking about a very specific area that is, as I said, just off of downtown Denver. We're going to rewind at the time before Denver was there. The reason that Auraria cropped up where it did was it is at the confluence of the South Platte River and Cherry Creek. So right where they met, which you can't really see anymore in urban development, but there is a riverfront that is just off campus. And obviously everything has been diverted as Denver itself sprung up into this huge metropolitan area. But we're talking about a pretty small area that is right where those two waters meet.
Okay.
Obviously, it goes without saying, anywhere you go, but especially in Colorado, white people were not the first to discover that this was a pretty handy place to make a living and call home. There were a number of indigenous tribes that moved through this area or resided in this area seasonally at various points. The Ute, the Apache, the Comanche, the Kiowa, the Arapaho. So this was Denver, the area around Denver itself, was a very popular area. It was good for natural resources. Auraria itself, how did it get its name? It got its name based off of the atomic symbol for gold, AU.
Oh, okay.
Some of the earliest history of indigenous communities and white folks, they're not settlers yet. White fur trappers and fish trappers and traders started happening around the 1810s in this area. It was still pretty sporadic. The Cherokee, who spent time here, did discover gold around the confluence, some gold dusts, gold nuggets, various things, but they kept the location secret. So they would have the metal. It was recognized that they had the metal, but they didn't want to tell anybody where they got it from.
I can
Probably
see that.
because they knew that the minute white folks get a whiff of a cash cow natural resource, they are going to kill you and they're going to take your stuff. Unfortunately, that's what happened, especially in Colorado. So in 1858 is really when Auraria kicked off. It was founded by two Georgia brothers who had moved out here by way of Kansas. And one of the men was named William Green Russell. So he had heard rumors that gold was being discovered kind of simultaneously in various parts of Colorado, in the Rocky Mountains, at Ralston Creek, the foothills around Boulder, and at this confluence on the plains. There was no Denver at this point, like there wasn't anything. So Russell got a group of men and they posted up and have started mining, just like panning
Yeah.
in the confluence of these rivers, right? Really, Cherry Creek and Dry Creek. Cherry Creek and Dry Creek. I cannot say creek 2 times in a row, but everything in this story is named something something creek. I'm gonna try my best.
They found gold in the creeks.
They found gold in the creeks.
In the creeks.
So they made their camp where they found a pretty good concentration of gold running downstream from the Rocky Mountains. This is about July 1958. They named the mining camp, which is all it was at this point, Auraria. One, after the Latin term aurarium, which stands for gold, which is also Au, the periodic and atomic symbol for gold. They also named it because they're in Georgia. There was also an auraria there. And so it was a twofold hat tip to where they came from, and also to signify that at this place they had struck it rich. So the minute that these miners find a substantial amount of gold in the stream, they are not leaving. And that is why it is perhaps actually the best claimant of actually being the heart and the start of Denver, because the town was planned for neat city blocks. So the grid system was made. There is a map that I will drop in the pictures for everybody so you can see. But once they knew this is a substantial find, this is going to be immediately, then they got investors and they chartered the town. So they had city blocks with regular lots spaced by 16 feet alleys, numbered streets that ran perpendicular. And so it was your typical grid system. So the parallel streets, which ran parallel to Cherry Creek, that was the boundary that they used. So in between Cherry Creek and the South Platte River, they did parallel named streets and then numbered grid streets. And even though this is all still mostly empty lots that were staked out with a flag and tents, it was still a town.
Yeah.
And it was a town right before Denver was a town. Not by much, but enough. Enough that they were there. I use the term first. Air bunnies. Not first. First white people.
Yeah.
So a year later, by 1859, there was a modest number of cabins and various wooden buildings, either fully wooden or, as we've talked about in typical mining towns and western towns that are slapped up, it's a wooden front with a tent in the back. And the town planners wanted a much grander future for Auraria. They thought, this is going to take over. We are going to make this the industry center for gold mining in Colorado. They were almost right. Almost. So as news of the discovery spread in Colorado, especially around this time, people are flooding in particular, prospectors. And there was another town site that was staked out just across Cherry Creek from it. And so they were advertising. They were saying, this is our town, this is our area, here's the lots. They're free. Come and get it. I do believe they advertised as free to all immigrants. Yeah. I don't know if they meant immigrants to America or if they were using that as somewhat of an Oklahoma land grab thing of, we have free lots. If you are wanting to strike it rich, come get it. Mine, as long as you improve the area, it's yours. I couldn't figure out, if our modern definition of immigrants and their definition of immigrants were the same definition of immigrants, but they did advertise free to all immigrants. And it was November 6th of 1859 that Auraria Town Company formalized and adopted a constitution and made itself an official township. At the time, there was no Colorado. We were part of the Kansas Territory. It was sparsely settled up through the late 1850s. But Colorado was still not a territory or a state yet at this point. This is very early on. Right around this same time, as I said, across Cherry Creek, there was another group from Lawrence, Kansas, and they established Denver City. It wasn't Denver City at this time, but it was the first mining settlement in what would be Denver.
Mhm.
So there are already two mining towns. Again, let's use the term town loosely. People are pooping in the street. All right. So around the same time that Auraria is founded, that Denver City is founded, there is also Highland that is founded in this same area. And the only reason it is important to remember is one, competition, but two, now you are starting to see where the neighborhoods in Denver are getting their names from. It's not Highlands Ranch,
No.
different area, but this is the Highlands, what now is the Highlands neighborhood. So if people ever go to a city and they wonder, why are all these neighborhoods named certain things? There is reason, and it's probably back when the town was founded. Because one gets richer and bigger, and then it just grows and takes over all of the others, much like a fungus. So the Kansas folks who founded Denver town, then to be Denver City, they adopted their constitution on November 22nd of the same year that Auraria adopted theirs. So they are neck and neck. They're also neck and neck for gold mining and resources.
What was the date for Auraria?
18.
Like, what was the month?
Let me go back. Boop, boop.
So I'm making things difficult.
I'm just digging through. There's a lot of 1858, 1859, and the hard part is, is that super accurate? Maybe.
Yeah.
So the town was chartered. I'm trying to figure out. If you go by when people started saying, oh, this is my home, it would be October 1858.
So literally like a month before Denver.
Yes, like a month before Denver town chartered itself in November of 1858.
That's wild.
Again, these are just groups of guys in tents that have a map and say, but this is what we're going to do.
Mhm.
And got investors and prospectors to come in to fund the plan of the town. But they do have town charters, they do have constitutions, and they are in the Kansas territory, so they're up and running at this point. And there are some wooden structures, not many, but some. So Auraria and Denver town are playful, friendly rivals. In April 1859, Rocky Mountain News editor William Byers set up shop in Auraria on the second floor of Richin Wooten's Saloon. Because of course there's a bar. It's the first building to pop up. It's a bar and a brothel. Come on.
Yeah. And then a church.
And then a church. And the church is like just a tent.
Yeah.
With a bell.
Or possibly the bar that they just use Sunday mornings.
Yeah, there's a preacher in town and they want to be on the preacher's good side. So they let him use the bar on Sundays for services, as long as he's out by noon so that they can still get their lunch crowd.
Exactly.
And that's what you do.
Or you just, stay the night. You wake up in the bar and suddenly it's church.
Yeah. Maybe you're getting your soul saved and you didn't even realize it. I wonder, how many spiritual awakenings do you think people had at those fire and brimstone camp meetings simply because they were hungover?
Yeah. It's much easier to believe in the devil when you're hungover.
That is a fact. That is so true. The devil is real when you are fighting for your life. Oof. Okay, so William Byers, who becomes a very, very important person in Colorado's history as the founder of Rocky Mountain News, he sets up shop in Auraria. And then the town rivalry is so heated that he's worried he'll lose his customer base if he stays in Auraria because Denver town people will not buy his newspaper. So he up and moves and he builds an office in the dry bed of the Cherry Creek between the two of them in order to maintain neutrality.
That seems like a bad idea.
It was, they had rerouted the river
Okay.
for space.
Still though, like if it's a place that water wants to go.
Water is going to go there, and then why would you not mitigate for that? That's a great question, and we're going to find out a lot more about that later.
Okay.
So, but he's like, I'm not fucking dealing with this. There's some prime
Mhm.
land. It's in between both of you. That's where I'm going to set up shop because we all need to read the newspaper.
Yeah.
Wrong. The office was soon destroyed in a flood. So he wasn't really very neutral for very long. He did end up moving his practice to Denver. But that just goes to show that like Auraria was always there. It was
Yeah.
never letting Denver sleep. Never, never, never. And originally, Auraria was more successful at business and attracting interest and investors. However, Denver won kind of an important victory. This is all in the late 1850s, early 1860s, just before the Civil War, but not by much. Denver offered 53 lots and 9 shares to the railroad, the Leavenworth Express and the Pikes Peak Express, because this was the time of the Great Western Expansion and the Transcontinental Railroad.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Denver, because it was just on a flat plain, when it offered to the railroads and the railroad built their junctures through, that was when Denver started to edge further and further and further ahead because Auraria would always have to go to them to utilize their rail lines.
Right.
So having a stagecoach connection was crucial for Denver's growth because hotels and saloons wanted to be near the stagecoach terminals. So that was really where business started cropping up. Like Denver wasn't really founded directly because of gold or silver discoveries. It was founded because it was a phenomenal place to run trade through to get to all those areas.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had cattle, then you had silver and gold ore going to and from, you had agriculture and people, and then tourism. So April 5th, 1860, while Auraria fought a valiant fight to be an independent town, it conceded and it merged officially with Denver.
Okay.
At this point. For the next 100-ish years, it was known officially as West Denver.
Okay.
The name changes. So on maps, you will see it described as West Denver. In official documents, it will be West Denver. And the term Auraria won't really be used to describe the neighborhood again until the 1960s. So West Denver and Auraria are the same thing, if people are ever reading about them. Same neighborhood, same area. Now, I'm going to continue using Auraria because that's what we've been doing, and I don't want to confuse myself.
Fair.
Because life is already confusing. So the people who inhabited this neighborhood and who built it up were always sort of working class. That was the general, especially after, like we said, Denver got railroads and started to leap forward in industry. It
Hmm.
was always a neighborhood that housed the industry workers and the factories themselves. And so the socioeconomic status was always just a little bit lower than the areas that were very like Cap Hill or Larimer Square or 16th Street and that kind of thing. But that doesn't mean bad. Not bad. It was home primarily to lumber mills, warehouses, breweries, which if we have time, we're gonna do the history of one of them. Various other businesses, and then those families also lived there. So there were single family homes, there were also boarding houses for single men, lots of saloons, obviously. Lots of there was an opera house, and not the Ellie Calkins opera house, like the big grand opera house in the sense of like mining towns would throw up a wooden structure, call it an opera house to make it sound classy, but it's really just like penny dreadfuls and vaudeville shows and musical troupes and showgirls.
Hmm.
Think a bit more bawdy, a bit
A
more
bit more
loud and
Vegas.
raucous, a little bit more Vegas, but they call themselves opera houses to give an air of legitimacy.
All right, when we
So
open our saloon, we'll name it an opera house.
yes. Yeah, because how else is Misty Apparitions supposed to do a truly dignified and classy performance?
Exactly.
It's going to be so good. And it was always also home to primarily immigrant groups of everywhere. Some of the oldest to inhabit the neighborhood were American born citizens who moved from the East, but also German, Irish, and Mexican communities because Colorado was part of the Mexican territory for a very long time. And like indigenous communities from the legacy of being moved off of reservations, which is a whole separate thing in Colorado's history. So I'm not getting into that one yet. So this was always a home that was very, very multicultural. And that is important to know from jump, especially when we get into part two and we hear the PR campaign around creating the campus. So keep that in mind, folks. There were several floods, as you asked. Why would you build on floodplains? I don't know. Colorado has literally never learned that lesson. I'm
Yeah,
living
it's
in a
not their jam.
floodplain right now. We don't know. We don't know. In the 1860s and 1880s, the significant flooding that happened at the confluence kind of made the land in Auraria less desirable to rich folks and for people to build houses there because they were getting destroyed. So that area and the land itself got sold off to developers of railroads and other industrial uses. And then around that time as well, 1890s or so, we start getting a lot of Eastern European immigrants who are moving to this area in Denver,
Okay.
both because the land was cheap and that's where they could afford to rent boarding houses and homes, and also because, shocker of the century, there was a lot of xenophobia, and Denver proper didn't really want Eastern European immigrants in some of the neighborhoods. They were not welcome. So they went to areas where they were welcome. That's a smarter thing to say. Um, 1890s, 1920s, the West Colfax neighborhood, which included West Denver slash Auraria, then started having higher concentration of Eastern European Jews that moved there. Most originally left Russia because of religious persecution that was happening during the Bolshevik Revolution. Right before, I think there was like a Decemberist revolt, and then also around this time, post World War One, the Bolshevik Revolution, when the Romanov dynasty was assassinated. So we're getting a lot of Jewish communities here, tuberculosis treatment centers. We're created in this neighborhood. There was the Jewish Hospital for Consumptives that opened around this time, which then changed its name as it expanded its services. It was started as a sanatorium for tuberculosis patients, Jewish tuberculosis patients. And now it is the National Jewish Hospital. Some pretty major historic figures lived in the Auraria neighborhood at this time. Golda Meir was probably the most historically important one. She later becomes the future Israeli prime minister. Yes, and her home is preserved, so we will save that for when we talk about the historic preservation in part 2/3. So that was moved. So again, all of this to say is there are a lot of immigrant groups that are cohabitating in this neighborhood relatively peacefully. There is still some contempt between there are culture clashes. The German and Irish immigrant communities, for example, around the 1870s, I almost said 1770s, which is not true. And between the 1870s and 1890s were tense. They were building separate churches, even though they were both Catholic. Not all of Germany is Catholic, but there are still German Catholics. And so the German Catholic community and the Irish Catholic community were building separate churches at the time. There was one instance in around like the late 1880s, early 1890s that a group of Irish residents attended Mass at a German church, St. Elizabeth's, because they did not have a Catholic church of their own. And I guess neither group was very happy about that. So the solution afterwards was to build an Irish Catholic church, which is still standing. There was also a Latinx community, a very, very vibrant, long-standing, multi-generational Latinx community in this area. And in the early 20th century, the major population and a lot of the white population that lived in West Denver was starting to decline because streetcars and automobiles were coming to Denver. They were having paved roads, there were streetcars that were running back and forth downtown. And so it allowed people to move outside of the city. It's one of those,
Oh, okay.
The Great Migration
Mm-hmm.
from urban areas, which America has every few periods or so. Everyone wants to move to the city because that's where the jobs are. And then rich people don't want to live side by side with their lower socioeconomic neighbors. And then they move out. So then the suburbs are the place to be. And then the suburbs become very far removed and boring or run down. So then you move back to the cities. They were in one of those phases. So we're now at 1920. We have a lot of Latinx farmers who live in the city and then farm just outside of it. And World War I veterans are moving in. So that starts to shift the neighborhood to a predominantly less white population. And this is when you start to see the early stages of West Denver is run down. West Denver is trashy. That was not the case. But this is the seeds that are in like public health posters. It's talk at
Right.
city council and stuff like that, that West Denver becomes the poor area, the, in their words, ghetto area. Is it? No. But white people are starting to move out. This goes through 1940, 1941. City officials were openly concerned about, in their words, the concentration of Latinos living in West Denver, as they believed overpopulation and crowding in the neighborhood's houses and apartments were negatively affecting the lives of the residents. So we have that now. It was controversial statements even at the time because if you ask the city officials who did not live in West Denver how they felt about it, they would say things like that. We're worried about overcrowding and public health, and that the homes are getting run down, and there's all of these people living in this 2-bedroom squalor. But if you go into the neighborhood itself and you go into Auraria and you ask the residents, how do you feel about things here? They were very happy. They loved the neighborhood. They thought it was great. It was becoming a cultural center for them where they
Mhm.
could live freely. This is still the days of segregation, and Denver was segregated. Let's not get that shit twisted, people. This is also 1920s, around the same time that the Ku Klux Klan has quite a foothold in Colorado government at all levels,
Especially Denver.
especially Denver. So there is major racial tension, and West Denver, Auraria, is where the Latinx community can express their culture.
Hmm.
I mean, freely, relatively. But like, this
Yeah.
is their home. They've been living there for generations. They are taking care of it. In their eyes, it is a vibrant place. They absolutely love it. There is music, there is restaurants, there are community centers where they are fighting for their civil liberties. This is not like some trashy abandoned hellscape.
Yeah.
So, despite lack of resources from the city, the residents of Auraria felt that it was super rich in tradition and kinship and community, and Auraria continued to thrive
Mhm.
until another bout of substantial flooding in 1965, when much of the South Platte River, which is right there, flooded, and it did some substantial damage to much of the neighborhood. A lot of the business centers, a lot of homes were destroyed and damaged, potentially beyond repair.
Mhm.
And that is where the official part one is going to stop, because Denver city officials see this as an opportunity to do what they have been wanting to do for quite some time,
Mhm.
which is take the space for their own assumed gains.
Right.
And so now they're all part of Denver. What? Denver.
Denver.
Excuse me. Denver. But from here on out, it is important to make a distinction that Denver and its eyes on Auraria directly becomes in conflict with the Auraria community's plans for itself. And after this flood, they are now vulnerable. And that's prime pickings.
Yeah.
So I thought we would end with one of the most iconic landmarks, because it does a very good job highlighting the evolution of the neighborhood, especially the immigrant communities around it. So we're going to be talking about Tivoli Brewery,
Ooh.
which is on the Auraria campus and is now it's probably one of the most iconic shots of the campus that you see. I have a picture of it. I have a picture of it on my phone because there was one night that I had finished up classes, and so I was walking to the bus and it was backlit and it was really pretty. Because you get the sunset there and then the mountains. It's gorge. So it and its huge smokestack that rises up with the side that says Painted Tivoli Brewery is now also the student center.
Oh, okay.
So the way that all three of the higher ed schools exist on campus is that there are certain common areas that all three can use at the same time, like the student center, there's a gym. Other than that, they'll all be in the same buildings, but like not every class. So I only ever went, and now it's grown so much that CU Denver has built some of its own additional buildings on campus and revitalized them. The Community College of Denver also has its own separate campus hub, and Metro does as well. And then there are some of the buildings that are unofficially / officially like only for Metro classes or Denver classes or whatever. But the student center where the Tivoli Brewery is located is one of the communal spaces. Everyone can go there. Everyone can get their books there. There's food courts. There's all kinds of stuff. There's some just weird looking places that I love that are definitely haunted, which will be in part 3. It is still a historic landmark, and it is one of the most iconic landmarks on campus. Everybody knows the Tivoli. It was named that way after the Tivoli Gardens, located in Copenhagen, Denmark, by a previous an owner. It was renamed by one of the owners of the brewery. So before it was the Tivoli, the building itself was built in 1864 by a German immigrant named Moritz Siggi. And the reason that he built it there was an artisanal well there. There was groundwater, and it was clear, and it was not poopy, and it was good. So what do you do with clear, not poopy water sources? You make beer.
You make beer.
You make beer. Not just any beer, you make German-style beers.
Mm.
His signature was a hybrid lager ale named a buck beer. And it was similar to a bock, which is a light-bodied but amber-colored beer.
Okay.
So think easy drinking.
Okay.
It's run-of-the-mill. It's not super light and crispy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not a very dark, sort of like really intense malty beer that most people could be considered off-putting.
Mm.
It's just easy.
Beer for the masses.
It's a beer for the masses, and it absolutely was. So his brewery started doing very well, and buck beer was his signature, and it was the best, and everybody loved it. So he was getting some popularity. Then he died in a carriage accident in 1874.
Oh.
So, oops. Oopsie.
I feel like there's like a story. Anytime we do a story in this era in Denver, it's like, oh, and then they got hit in a carriage accident and died.
Yeah.
Oh, and then they got hit by a trolley and died.
And then died. Yeah. Like, people are just getting hit. I don't know the details of the horse carriage accident, but it was very unexpected. So after he passed away, the brewery was then sold to a man named Max Messelheimer. He renamed Siggy's Brewery, which I believe at the time was just Siggy's Brewery. It was his last name. Melsenheimer then renamed it to Milwaukee Brewery and attempted to expand business production. And so he purchased 250 brewing kettles. Milwaukee Brewery didn't have as good of a recipe, so it wasn't doing as well. Melsenheimer foreclosed, and then John Good purchased the property, renamed it Tivoli Brewing Company. And he was involved with early Denver banking as well. So this is very much the tradition of guys make their money in finance and banking and then start to diversify in the things that probably were their hobbies at one point. And also a brewery kind of getting like bought out by a major corporation, which has happened in Denver ever since. This is a tale as old as time. He worked in finance, and now he wants a change of pace, and he always liked drinking, so fuck it. I'm going to start a brewery because I've got money to throw around. So he renames it Tivoli Brewing, and at that point, it was the actual brewery with the smokestack, and then right next to it was the Turnhale Opera House. Not really an opera. It was a music hall. And it would also host a lot of German immigrant events as well. So it wasn't just showgirls. It was also a community space where everyone could meet, form connections. If you were new and had recently just immigrated from Germany, that's where you could probably make social connections with people that you either had a direct relation to or an indirect relation to. Oh, there were some other fun stories about Melzenheimer's era for Milwaukee Brewing. He was kind of a shady dude. He was charged in 1881 with falsifying his income on tax reports.
Okay.
We've never stopped doing that. And then, unfortunately, a year after he was busted by the IRS for income fraud, his wife and his 3-year-old child passed away.
Related carriage accident.
It doesn't say why. So why do you think they passed away? I have no idea. We could say
I
carriage
mean,
accident.
we're gonna say carriage accident.
Okay, carriage accident, which is, I hope, faster and way less painful than poop water
Yeah. Or tuberculosis.
or tuberculosis, consumption at this point. But Melzenheimer, right before he foreclosed, was definitely in kind of a down slump, like
It
a
was rough.
personal rut. He was not doing so great. He chased a saloon keeper around with a billiard cue to like threaten him and stab him when the saloon keeper said, "Hey man, you owe me money. Please pay." Melzenheimer's solution was to threaten him with a pool cue and chase after him. So like he wasn't in a good place when he had to foreclose on the business. He had grand plans, not in a good place. But John Good ends up being very successful with the Tivoli Brewery. Brewery.
Re-
Brewery. I'm going to stop it. So he officially takes over about 1900, renames it Tivoli, operates Tivoli with some of their signature beers, which were easy drinking, beer for the masses, like a working class beer. And then, funny enough, in about World War II, the Tivoli, had um which had been using modern railway and truck and car distribution systems, ended up having to use horse-drawn beer wagons again because there was rationing going on for steel and for aluminum and for cans. So all of their industry, those raw materials were then being diverted to the war effort. So they were like, well, how are we going to get beer to people? Glass bottles and horse-drawn beer wagons.
I mean, that's a better vibe anyway.
It's a vibe. It would be so cool to buy a 6-pack of beer off of a horse-drawn beer wagon. And like kegs, so
Yeah,
they could they could go through, and if you're not buying the whole keg because you're not a saloon, you could also just be like, hey man, I'll have a beer. And then they send you
right?
have a glass. That's
I
a
would
vibe.
totally be more likely to buy my beer from a horse.
Yes. That is a whole mood.
Hmm.
So John Good passes away around, I don't know an exact date, but around the 1940s. And his wife, Lorraine Good, takes over the business. It's interesting. There's some drama. She is married 2 times after John, one to a man named Royce Kent, who becomes president of the brewery while she took over as chairman of the board. I don't really know what the difference is between those two roles. I feel like that's just semantics at that point, but whatever. Kent dies pretty quickly after that. He passes away 3 years later. And this is the 1950s, and the Tivoli is still doing very well. Tivoli Brewing is all over Denver and Colorado. Their distribution is good. About 1954 is when Lorraine, John Good's wife, marries a Russian singer named Lubomir Vishnagov. Yeah, yeah. Who is 22 years younger than her.
Okay.
Spectacular. So I think that's just fun. These are some moments in that, like, I'm just imagining if I were a resident of the neighborhood, because this is a
Mhm.
huge brewery, so like everyone is connected to it, everybody knows
Yeah.
about it at some point, and then you hear like the absolute hottest tea about the owner of Tivoli Brewing. Spectacular. So she marries this guy because it's love, right? And he has no
Yeah.
other nefarious purposes.
Definitely not.
Mm-mm. So Lorraine makes Lubomir the president of Tivoli Brewing. And at the time that she does, Tivoli Brewing and Zhang's Brewery, which is which is not related, but it just goes to show they were the biggest breweries before Prohibition. They were huge in Colorado.
Hmm.
Huge. Now, Zhang's never really recovered after Prohibition, but Tivoli managed to. And
Okay.
it was the dominant brewery in Denver and Colorado and continued to grow in demand. And then in the 1950s, when I want to call him William, and that's not his name, Lubomir, inherits the business.
Hmm.
They were churning out 150,000 barrels a year. Huge brewery, everywhere west of the Mississippi. And then very quickly after he inherits the business, Lorraine finds out that Lubomir is, shocker, not that faithful. There's some questionable, I don't know. I never would have seen coming that a younger man would befriend, woo, marry a very wealthy older woman, get himself ahead, and then play a little too fast and loose and be a little too arrogant in his behavior.
They were in love.
They were in love, Auntie. Okay?
I can't believe
This
it.
is That's never happened ever in the history of
Mm-mm.
ever. So, what? So she finds out and she cuts him out of the business. She says, "Get fucked. You're fired." She assumes command again. And then I think, like, woman, just do it without a man.
Yeah.
You don't need
Maybe it's
that.
the era.
I guess. That is true. At this time, women could be denied lines of credit because a man didn't sign off on it. Um So now we're going to go up through the early 1960s. The Tivoli expands. They do the Highenbrow brand. And then in 1965, Lorraine dies. So after that, the building and the brewery are purchased from the estate by Carl and Joseph Oconatio. I believe it's pronounced Oconatio. I don't think it's Ochinatio because that sounds wrong, but maybe. However, this is 1965. So they bought a very popular brewery and then it flooded and was substantially damaged right after. So they immediately faced hardship in the business. And I believe Lorraine also had some financial issues and struggle with the split with her ex-husband. So even though the beer was really popular, the back end business finances were not quite as stable. Then with new owners, then with a massive flood, then a year after the massive flood, there was a huge labor strike. So it set the business back exponentially, and they limped along for a few years until April of 1969, when the Tivoli ultimately closed. Until then, it was the second oldest continuously operating brewery in the country. It was second only to Pennsylvania's Yuengling Brewery. And it just sat there. Like, the building, which had expanded to have, it had over time just encompassed the Turn Hall Music Hall. It was huge, and they were building the campus, and no one knew what to do with it. Nobody wanted to tear it down, but nobody knew what to do with it. It was briefly a shopping mall in the 80s. And let me tell you, when you're in it, you can tell.
Yeah.
There are some mall vibes. Like good mall vibes. It housed an AMC 12 theater, which hosted Denver Film Society's annual Denver Film Festival from 2001 to 2011. There is, at least the last time I was on campus, when you go to the Tivoli Center, you can feel kind of how disjointed it is. It's like you're seeing architecturally all of the history of the Auraria campus kind of built into one building, because there's a historic brewery area from when it was a neighborhood. And then you still go in and there's areas where you're like, this was definitely malls and shopping centers. Like, there are really narrow alleys. There's lots of stairs going up to different levels and half levels from when it was a brewery. And there's these huge open spaces. And you think, well, why the fuck is this here? That's kind of weird. Well, there was a copper brewing kettle that was there for like 100+ years. And now it's gone. So now you just have this space. There's this back area that you walk around, and it still has the facade of a movie theater. Like, still. I love that building. I absolutely love it, but it aesthetically is chaos. It is high as a kite. Anywhere you go on different levels, you will see evidence of some form of the previous history. Somewhere.
That sounds fun.
I think that's really cool. A lot of people think that that's really weird. Also, your cell phone does not like to work in it. Yeah, so that's a hard one.
Checks out.
But then after it was the shopping center in the 80s, it wasn't a mall for very long. It was really just the 80s and 90s. And then the university and the campus, all of the universities, really needed that space to utilize as like a student center. And so that was when they took it over.
Gotcha.
That's part one of Auraria. Did that make sense? Okay, cool. Because I really wanted to end with like a highlight of one of the buildings so that when people listen to part two, it's not all new and you will already understand the dynamics at work for ultimately when they eminent domain just level a town.
Cool.
Woo!
Oh, man. All right.
So I hope folks enjoyed this deep dive history lesson. Please come back for part two, and maybe also a part three. There will be spooky.
Yeah.
I think destroying an entire vibrant neighborhood for your own personal reasons is spooky, but on a different level. We haven't even gotten into the murders.
Oh, yeah.
There's
murders.
In modern history, there has been 3. In actual history, there has been a lot more. I mean, this was still the Wild West. So again, people were just shooting and shitting in the street. Where can folks engage with us if they would like, Andy?
You may find us on social media at Two Girls Who Scare Easily with the number two, and on YouTube. And you can email us directly at two girls who scare easily with the number two at gmail.com. And we would love to hear from you, but definitely come back for part two and possibly part three. Otherwise, yeah, stay smart
Stay safe.
and stay spooky.
Bye.
Bye.